vaccine. And so in terms of Union Concerned Scientists, we work for a particular division called the Center for Science and Democracy. So it's a group where we advocate for science in federal decision-making processes. So we're really intrigued with how pandemic response should have vaccine at its front and center in its response, and this includes vaccine development. So we've been following these issues closely. And who we are, so I'm a master's in public health and a master's in science. I got my degrees from Drexel University and George Washington University. I have 8.5 years of research experience in public health and science policy, and 2.5 of those years have been at UCS. In terms of a fun fact, I'm actually also a Fulbright scholar, so I did some teaching English in Malaysia several years back. So I'll turn it over to Casey.
Oh, I just learned something about Anita that I didn't know. Hi, everyone. I'm Casey Coleman. As Anita said, I also work at the Center for Science and Democracy. And I also have a master's in public health. Anita and I actually went through the same program at George Washington. I have more of a background in global health, actually. However, that has been in many ways very focused on vaccines. And I've been at UCS for just over a year. Fun fact is that, well, one, I'm calling in from Washington, DC, so it's a very interesting place to be right now. But I also am using my extra time during quarantine to brush up on my Spanish.
Perfect. And I'll also just mention one last thing. So me, Casey, and our organization, UCS, we are in no way affiliated with pharma companies. We are not funded by pharma companies. We are not affiliated with the government. So this is all independent science and research that we're telling. Yeah. Okay, so in terms of the first question, how can I place my trust in COVID-19 vaccines? We feel like it's important to describe the idea of honestly, medical racism. So a lot of communities of color have been impacted by basically unethical doctors and scientists over the years who've done really bad things. So mistrust is understandable and expected. To give 2 examples, the Tuskegee syphilis study is a study that started in the 30s and ended in the 70s. And it just was absolutely egregious. It featured low-income African-American individuals who had syphilis. When even in the course of the study, good syphilis treatments became available, and the doctors and scientists specifically wouldn't allow participants to be able to get the vaccine, which was just unethical, get the treatments, which is unethical in many, many different ways. Henrietta Lacks is another individual. She died in the 1950s, and she's a wonderful African-American woman from a low-income background in Baltimore, Maryland. She had an aggressive form of cancer, and so she went to her doctor to get it treated. Unfortunately, the doctor did try to treat her, but also took cells from her and gave it to certain scientists, and then later on, other people down the road actually profited off of her cells. It was the basis of a number of different medical discoveries, and until very recently, Henrietta Lacks and her family did not get any compensation for this. Henrietta Lacks actually died soon after, and her family only got compensated, I think, last year. As the first time. So these are egregious types of things that are occurring, and it also created a wave of reform in the US in terms of medical research. So there's a department now in the Department of Health and Human Services called the Office of Human Resource Protection, and their primary job is to make sure there's a lot of ethics in research. So one of their primary things that they've implemented across the country is something called internal review boards. So every college, university, every research center you can imagine in this country, if a scientist at those organizations wants to do a study, they're required to go through an internal review board to check the ethics of that study. So so we can basically prevent some of the previous examples from occurring. And I'd also mention that in terms of vaccine trials, there's actually a higher standard of safety because well, scientists know that the vaccine is being administered to so many people. So there's actually even more ethical concerns being addressed there. And I will turn this to Casey now.
Yeah, so before we address other questions, we wanted to just go through a little bit of how generally vaccines work. So vaccines harness the body's natural defense mechanisms. And by introducing the body to an unharmful or version of the virus, we can actually get the body to build defenses and produce an immune response that will create a memory that will then protect you from any kind of invasion by the virus if you were to come into contact with it in the future. And there are a variety of different types of vaccines out there. And so, of all the COVID-19 vaccines, there are 3 different types that are being developed. The first type is one that uses a harmless piece of the virus that causes COVID-19. And this has been used to make a variety of vaccines in the past, such as Hep B, whooping cough. So you've likely had a vaccine that uses this type of technique. The second type uses a weakened live version of a different virus. So basically it takes the body or the bones of a different virus and uses it as a vessel to then introduce some of the genetic material from COVID-19 into your body. And in the same way, this gets your body to produce an immune response, and so it's able to fight against it in the future. And the third type teaches our cells how to make a very specific protein that will trigger an immune response from your body. And this has been used and researched for a very long time, including for flu vaccines, the Zika vaccine, and rabies vaccines. Also, if you've ever heard of cancer treatments and where they use viruses or your body's immune system to fight against the cancer, this is the type of strategy they're using. And just to clarify, none of these vaccines can give you COVID-19 in any way, and none of them interact with your DNA. So the third type of vaccine is actually the type that is being used by Moderna and Pfizer. And yes, so this type of vaccine creates, basically gets your body to start producing certain proteins that are also found on the COVID-19 vaccine. And this is what gets your body to start producing the cells that it needs to fight against the virus. In a lot of ways, I have been using the metaphor that it's kind of like a friend coming in and saying like, hey, if you find someone who looks like this, kind of showing you the protein, they're not good for you. They don't have your best interest in mind. So if they come knocking on your door, be sure to turn them away. So that's kind of what the vaccine is trying to do. Get your body to recognize and create a long-lasting memory of the coronavirus so that it will fight it off.
All right, thanks, Casey. Another question we wanted to ask is, do the vaccines work well? And we're going to focus in this part on the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine. We specifically looked at the FDA scientists who went through this with a fine-tooth comb. And so again, FDA has approved Pfizer and Moderna as vaccines, and they tested it in tens of thousands of people. The pharma companies that produce this also try to be transparent and publish their methods and protocols ahead of time. And both vaccines showed evidence that they work. So they work approximately 95% of the time, which is great. There's some small differences, like the Pfizer vaccine, it can be used with people who are 16 years and older, while Moderna is only for 18 years and older. But both are 2 doses, approximately 3 weeks or 4 weeks apart, and they've been tested again in a number of different people. So, are they safe? So the data is showing that both are safe. It should be noted that experts say if you're going to have a reaction to a vaccine, it'll appear within the first 6 weeks. So the trial followed the participants for 8 weeks. And the common effects were ones that you might expect due to a flu vaccine. So pain at the injection site, fatigue, headaches, etc. In terms of children, there is now some research trying to be done to see if children 12 to 17-year-olds may be okay with taking the vaccine, but that's ongoing research right now. So are they safe and effective for people like me? So both of the 2 vaccines worked well across different age groups, genders, and racial and ethnic groups. So here's some data looking at specifically at the ethnic groups. They tested the wide variety of them, and I'll just focus in on one stat just to kind of give some information here. So for African American individuals, around 4,000 people were tested in the Pfizer vaccine, which represented about 10% of the population of people tested. And for the Moderna one, it was just over 3,000 people, which represented around 10% of the vaccine that was tested in for Moderna. But you can see that it was broken up. A number of different ethnic groups and racial groups are tested, which measured in the hundreds or thousands of people. In terms of some other data, women and men were both tested approximately equally in both vaccines. People who are 65 and older were tested around 21% of the participants were 65 and older for Pfizer and about 25% for Moderna. And people with underlying health conditions were tested readily as well. And this would include people with things like asthma, obesity, diabetes, some of the underlying health conditions associated with severe COVID. So they were also well represented. Other